In the next chapter of your life, you'll be able to persevere through any mid-career struggle you're facing while navigating the uncharted waters of your next chapter. How do I know? Because you're listening to this podcast. Get ready to shed your current identity and shift into the next chapter of your life that's narrated by the future of you. Today on the show, I have Christopher Korey. This is one of my favorite interviews, and here's why. Because there is a story that is associated with bringing him onto the show. So here's the story. When I moved to Florence, I couldn't hit my ass with both hands when it came to fashion. And I needed to be good at this because this is a town that is super fashion-y. And so I was like, okay, well, how do I learn how to do this? So, I went on Instagram and I started searching for style ideas, and I came across this guy named Christopher Korey. He was roughly around my age. He's into fitness. He's got gray hair and, these amazing suits. And he became this benchmark that I wanted to aspire to. So one day, my older daughter, Demi, who's 24, was in town from San Diego, and she needed something at the Apple Store. So we go to the Apple Store here in Florence, and I look over and I see, like, almost as if he popped off of my Instagram feed, sitting right next to the laptops is none other than Christopher Korey, the guy I'm following on Instagram, the guy that I'm screenshotting and taking to my tailor. I fanboyed out like a teenager meeting Harry Styles. We had a great conversation about how he got into fashion, and I learned that this whole world that he was in was a total next chapter story that took him by surprise. So in this episode, you're going to learn how the universe can sometimes grab you by the neck and pull you into your next chapter if you're not going to go. And I don't want to ruin the story, so I'm going to let Christopher Korey tell it to you directly. Christopher, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here, my friend. Pleasure to be here.
So I've already, in the intro, I've already explained how we ran into each other here at the Apple Store, which I think is just such a great story.
100%.
But I think what we're going to do is, I was thinking, for a lot of the people that listen to this show, they're in a place in their life where they are ready for a change. And some of them are very clear that that change is going to happen. In other words, the writing is on the wall. But for some of them, the change is sort of happening to them. Like the universe is making it happen for them, which is why I wanted to have you on the show. So thank you for taking the time to do this with us today.
Oh, no. The pleasure is completely mine. It's been too long since the Apple Store in Florence.
Too long since the Apple Store in Florence. Speaking of, I found you because like I mentioned to you in the store, I just moved to Italy. And fashion is, as you well know, a big thing here. And I had no idea what I was doing. And so I started searching Instagram for style tips. And I found this, fit guy with gray hair and, looked incredible. And so I started following you and screenshotting your outfits and your looks. And I took those screenshots to, a local tailor they call Sartoria here. And I had them, make me some suits. And I later learned that you were not in the fashion business. When I started following you on Instagram, I realized that you were not in the fashion business. You were actually, at that time, you were a real estate agent. So I thought maybe for people listening, maybe you can walk me through the story of how fashion sort of entered your life, and maybe even share the conversation that you had, that you were sharing with me about, being on the telephone with your dad and walking into the store. Like, it's a great story. It's a great story.
Well, how I got here is a very sort of circuitous route. Yeah, I've had my own real estate company for over 25 years. And what happens in real estate is you end up spending so much time with your clients, it becomes a pretty personal relationship. And when it did, it would sort of grow into you become a member of the family, especially your best clients who you've had for many years, and you end up selling them an apartment here in New York, and then their children apartments and their friends and whatever. And because you spend so much time with them, they're always sort of asking you, where'd you get that shoe? How, who's your tailor? This type of thing. So about, I don't know, about 10, 12 years ago, I started a sort of styling service that accompanied the real estate. So just because there was so much demand for it, it kind of grew organically. And then what happened is social media came along, and one of the young guys who was working for me was like, "Hey, Grandpa, you got to get on some sort of social media," which I was totally against. I didn't want to be on Facebook. I didn't want to be on anything having to do with that. But in terms of commerce and business, it's always best to listen to the people who are younger than you, have their
Yep.
finger on the pulse of what's going on. So Instagram seemed sort of the most, at the time, certainly seemed the most visual
Yep.
and, the most easy to use. So even a monkey like me could, kind of get a handle on it.
Yep.
And I to this day, I can't really tell you what happened, but it literally took on a life of its own. And a friend of mine who happens to be my tailor here in New York, who had been making all my stuff, he called me one day and he said, "Listen, I got 100 guys coming in here with you on the phone saying, 'Oh, you made him this. Can you make me this?'" And he said, "I actually think there's a business here,"
Yep.
which I thought he was out of his mind, which I still think he's out of his mind, but for various other reasons. And so, I said, "No, I don't think so, but I appreciate it. Let's, I'm happy you guys have got some business from it." And then he called me about a month later and he said, "No, listen, man, we got to talk because now it's kind of getting out of control." And I said, "Okay." So we talked, and at first we were just going to set up a little business in his existing, it's a family business. It's him and his dad. They've been tailors for 50 years. And we were just sort of going to have this nice, quiet little business as a sort of a side gig. And as it turned out, his dad knew of a tailor who was retiring and who had a store in Midtown, like an actual storefront in Midtown. So my buddy called me and he said, "Hey, my dad knows this guy. He's retiring. I think we should look at the space." I said, "Listen to me closely. We are not opening a retail store in the retail apocalypse that is happening.
Right.
So I said, "There's no way in hell that's happening."
Right.
Now, when he called me, I was actually in a meeting at the Peninsula Hotel here in New York. And he's trying to convince me. He's trying to convince me. I said, "Listen, I got to get back in this meeting. I'll talk to you later." I said, "Just out of curiosity, where is this thing that we're not doing?" And
Yeah.
he said, "Well, it's right across the street from the Peninsula Hotel." I said, "Ay, ay, ay." I said, "All right." I said, "I'll meet you there in about half an hour."
I'm at the peninsula. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And he was like, "What?" I'm like, "I'm in the peninsula right now, you idiot. Let's walk over there." And we go in there and listen, I show a million places, every day. When we walked into this shop, I had this weird like sensation come over me.
Yep.
I'm like, all right, either I'm coming down with the flu
Yeah.
or like there's something in here.
Yep.
Whatever. We left. He said, "What do you think?" I said, "No way in hell." I'm like, "It's cute space. We could do something with it, but it's the retail apocalypse. It's not happening." I start walking home, and my dad calls me, who's living in Los Angeles.
Yep.
And we're just shooting. He said, "What are you doing? What's going on?" I said, "Oh, I just looked at a store I'm not opening." Then he said, "Really? Where is it?" And I said, "Crossing the peninsula." And he said, "Go back." I said, "What?" He said, "Go back Just trust me. I said, okay. So I walked back there, and the son of the tailor is there. And, I knocked on the door, and he said, oh, did you forget your keys or what? I said, no, I'm on the phone with my dad, and just give me 2 minutes. And my dad, who's on the phone, said, look to your right. And is there a black and white photo of my friend Roland hanging in that store? Now, Roland was a tailor here in New York in the 70s, in the 60s and 70s, who used to make my dad's clothes. And I said, yeah, there is. And he said, yeah, I took that photo in 1965. He said, I think the shop you're in is the kid who used to be his apprentice, who used to bring me my coffee when I was waiting for my clothes to get made. Are you kidding me? And he said, nope, that's the kid. Turn the phone around, he sees the guy. He's like, yep, that's him. It's only 50 years later, but yep, that's him. I walked out of the store. I called my buddy. I said, you better get me a lease because it's a little too divine intervention for me to say no.
Okay, so this is the reason why I wanted to have you on the show, because I interview people for all sorts of things. Some people, I was a chiropractor for 25 years. I was ready for it to be over. And so I was actively searching. But there's also people like you who, whether you're actively searching or not, the universe was banging on your head. And no matter what, like you couldn't avoid it. You couldn't duck out of it. It was like literally grabbing you by the neck and pulling you in. And I want people to understand that in some cases, I mean, perhaps if we dig harder, we could find maybe there were whispers that were coming to you prior to this that you were ignoring. And, they say first you get the whisper and then you get the frying pan.
Yeah.
Maybe this was just your frying pan, but if we look at your life a bit before real estate, you had a strong desire for interior design. You were accepted at Parsons School of Design in New York. You also wound up studying visual arts, and you had this idea that to help you get into interior design, or to help you get some clients for interior design, that you're going to sell real estate. And you figure, okay, I'll sell them real estate. And then after they buy the house, they'll hire me to do the job.
Right.
So what's interesting to me is I wonder if that story sort of dictates for you in some way that perhaps real estate wasn't your destiny, but design in some way was. So I'd love you to kind of comment a little bit on, was real estate something that you looked at and said, well, I'm good at it, I can make money,
right,
and why not? But really underneath there was always this design thing.
Oh, absolutely. I'll give you a twofold answer to that one. One is your gut and the universe are very much the same. Neither one has ever steered you wrong. Whether you listen to it or not is a different ballgame. And you can very easily get sidetracked by not listening. In terms of the universe, sometimes you do have to get the frying pan. Sometimes you choose to ignore the messages because you don't think it's a viable situation, or you don't think it makes sense or practical sense. But very much like your gut has an amazing track record. It's never steered you wrong. Again, whether you listen to it or not is a different story. But whether you're in a relationship or you're down life's path, your gut will tell you this is happening, that's happening. You need to listen to these things. And you do or you don't, I don't know, but you can really get off track, which what seems like a good practical idea at the time, and you sort of you go sideways. I'll give you a very good example. I was sort of mentoring a kid for the summer who wanted to get into real estate. And all summer, I was beating over his head that if this is a brutal business, unless you eat it, drink it, sleep it, love it, are passionate about it, it has to be everything you're about. And he asked me an interesting question, and he said, "Well, you still love it, don't you?"
Mm.
And I said, "Okay, I'm going to tell you straight. I don't want what happened to me to happen to you. I got hooked into it because I was good at it, and the money became a drug that keeps you in there because it affords you a nice lifestyle, and and you're able to take care of the people you want to take care of, and all of that. And I had been beating for months over his head saying, listen, you have to do what you're passionate about. And when he hit me with that, I realized that, and I told him straight, it's a very different business than when I first got into it. So it was interesting then, but the passion I had for it then was never really the passion I have for other things that are much more creative. And I used myself as an example. And I said, look, you can be good at something and you can do very well at it and you can make a lot of money and have all the stresses that come with that. But it might not be, with all that success, it still may not be authentically you. You may be the best chiropractor in town, but both the universe and your gut were telling you there's something else that is more fulfilling for you personally, and probably something that if you do it, you'll contribute more to the world in addition to yourself. Those are the things you have to listen to. And when you sort of get away from yourself, that's when stuff goes sideways. It's really a delicate balance of being authentic to who you really are. When I was a kid, I was much more creative, and all I wanted to be was in a field where I could be creative. And then, like anybody else in your 20s or whatever, you start fumbling around, and then you come upon something that you're good at, and you go down that road because you think it's smart. Smart is relative. It may be smart financially and it may be practical and whatever, but it may not be who you authentically are. And if you don't pursue who you are authentically, that's not very smart.
And you pay for it later on in life. I mean, I can remember
Very much so.
being a kid, like I grew up in Queens in Rego Park, and I did not have the grades or the education to be a doctor, but I felt like I can get into the fringe thing. I could do that. I could be a dentist. I could be a chiropractor. I could be a podiatrist. You know what I mean? Like I could still have the doctor name. Nobody asked me actually what kind of doctor, but it was
right.
And so a lot of it was like, it was logical, and it was like a logical next step, and it was ego driven, and it was based on money, and it was based on security, but it wasn't based on what you're talking about, which is that heart, that passion, that joy, that thing, that intangible X factor that we can't put words to. But, as you're speaking, I'm realizing that some of the things that you did, probably a lot of them in real estate, probably served you extremely well when you opened up your business in fashion, because I can't imagine a faster education in business than New York real estate.
Yeah, that's true. No, listen, I really do, in spite of, going sideways, I still believe you're exactly where you're supposed to be. And without the training in real estate, which I would say, and any real estate person, in regardless of what city you're in, or any good business person for that matter, will tell you 90% of it is problem solving. I mean, honestly, that's what it is. It's problem solving. You're putting out fires all day long. And that translates to a myriad of businesses, depending on what business you're in. Sometimes the fires are huge. and maybe not as numerous, but you still have to do it. And those skills that you learn, problem solving, are invaluable in any business, in any field of life, actually. I mean, when something what seems like catastrophic happens to you in life, it's not so much the problem, it's your reaction to it that determines how that's going to go. If you freak out, you're going to get a freak out situation. If you don't, then you're going to be okay, and you'll manage it. And learning to manage crisis, problems, people, those are invaluable skills that you take with you wherever you go. So it totally served me well. But again, it's much easier to handle those things and apply those things to something that you're passionate about versus something that you're doing because you think it's smart and you think it's, the right thing to do. And a lot of people will tell you, well, what if you don't know what your passion is? And that's a bunch of crap, because you actually do know. You're probably more concerned about being honest with yourself and admitting what they are, because you think it might be wrong, or you won't be accepted, or you have other obligations and you don't want to admit, or well, that failure is a whole other thing. But when people say to me, well, I don't really know what my passion is, I said, okay, really? So if I break into your apartment tomorrow or your home, and I open your computer and I see your bookmarks on the side of your browser there, and the sites and places that you go to regularly, pretty much every day, all the time, that have nothing to do with business or anything else, that are just you in your downtime, I'm somewhere in that paper trail, I'm going to find your passion. Mm-hmm. There's going to be a common denominator there.
Mine is a 24-year-old that is very, very sexy.
Then there's that. Yeah. Then there's that. Yeah. There's some bookmarks in there that maybe should be in the private.
No, I get it. I mean, you're leaving a paper trail. I mean, all the books behind me, right?
Yep.
Like it's just, these are things that we're clearly interested in and we're passionate about.
Absolutely.
I want to talk a little bit about your influences, perhaps growing up a little bit, and maybe some of the natural tendencies that you have now. Your mom, if my research is right, was one of the first female writers on The Tonight Show, or the first female writer on The Tonight Show. And also, she was one of the first women in New York to start an advertising agency, sort of like Mad Men style.
Correct.
My mother was a secretary. So, in what ways do you think that having that kind of backgrounds sort of like influenced how you think about things today?
I think the largest influence, I mean, in addition to the fact that my mom was a complete rock star, I think the biggest influence is how you overcome and face fear. Because especially at that time, she was not by nature a overly sort of overt, brave person, but she was very good at facing fear. Now, at that time, it was unprecedented what she was doing. And not only was it unprecedented, but extremely difficult. And she, faced headwinds and difficulties that, you and I will never know.
Yep.
Being a woman at that time, you were a secretary, you were a housewife.
Yep.
Which are all very noble and worthy things to be, but she wanted something more. And she did it in a man's world that, especially at that time, women were not accepted in any way, shape, or form. But most of all, and how it influenced me, is when she has a quote, actually, that's on the internet. It's some site about quote of famous women, and it's her and like Oprah,
Oh my God,
side by side, and it's about how fear and facing your fear is like one of the greatest motivators of success. Is facing your fear and overcoming your fear. You're almost guaranteed success in some way, shape, or form by, running into the burning building rather than running away from it. And I think more than anything, whenever in school I was nervous about a test or something, she would always say the same thing to me. She would say, in her Brooklyn accent, she would say, well, is it going to kill you? And I said, what? She's like, if you don't do well, will you die? And,
That's great.
And I said, well, no, obviously not. And then she said, then you're going to be fine.
You'll be fine.
And then you take that and you sort of apply it to different parts of your life. And I hear her all the time, say, will you die?
But will you die? It's so much more dramatic. But will you die?
Will you die? And oh my God!
It's so much better in that accent than listening to some British person saying 100%. That which does not destroy me. You know what I mean?
It doesn't. It does. Right. Art thou going to die? Right. Yeah. Now, pretty much everything sounds better with a Brooklyn accent.
It does.
You take that and you really apply it to, and I use it today, when I have friends or family who are going through things, and I'm like, well, unless it's going to kill you, you're going to be fine. And if you kind of keep things in perspective that way, you really do kind of face fear in a different way. And you face it, keeping it in perspective and thinking, okay, the worst possible scenario is death. So anything above that is actually a pretty good deal.
We're going to be fine. So what do you think about the person that now is saying, okay, well, I'm hearing this and, I'm in my mid 40s and I have this other thing that I'm more interested in doing. And, perhaps I once loved what I was doing, but it's lost its shine and I want to do something else now. But, I've got a little imposter syndrome. I just feel like, who am I? It's hard to start from, at my age, I'm starting at ground zero. I'm a newbie in this business all over again. How did you deal with Christopher Korey, the real estate agent, to, Christopher Korey, Ralph Lauren? you know what I mean?
Let's not get crazy.
But you got just for the sake of the conversation. You know what I'm saying?
For the sake of the conversation.
You know what I'm saying? Like, how did you deal with, who am I to do this, or how am I going to do this? And I got to start this over again. Did you wrestle with any of that?
I didn't, because I didn't really think it would be either or. I always sort of planned to do both sort of at the same time, which I continue to do today. But being presented with the opportunity and not taking the shot would have been way harder for me to live with. That to me is torture. The shoulda, coulda, wouldas of life, I can't live with. If you're presented with the opportunity, and again, it's not going to kill you, you got to do it, because living with the idea of I had the chance and I let it go by, that to me is more torturous than not taking the shot. I never really thought, who am I to be doing this? Because if you go in with that mindset, you're almost guaranteed not failure, but a very limited amount of success. If I'm going to go down, I'm going to go down in flames, man. I mean, it's going to be a spectacular crash.
One hell of a fire.
Absolutely. But it's also going to be one hell of a party going up and down. If you go into it with that timid, who am I? This is not, then why do it at all? Don't nibble at it. Take a bite. If you take a bite, you're going to be okay.
Yeah, and you could take a bite of the apple. If you don't like it, spit it out. So I get it.
Totally.
I get it. All right. So as we wrap, I'm going to ask you some questions that may seem like these are weird questions. Just roll with it. What's one rule that you have for yourself that you will never break?
Don't settle.
I like that. What new behavior or habit has most improved your life?
I would say giving up a little bit of control,
Mm,
not having to control every facet and every minute detail, and delegating projects that I don't necessarily have to put my hands on.
hard to do. Hard to
Very,
do,
especially if you're a control freak.
especially if it takes one to know one. I get it.
Yeah.
What is an unusual or absurd thing that you love? Where somebody would look and go, well, that's weird that he likes that. What's something that falls into the, it's really weird, but I like it?
Junk food.
Junk food.
Oh, I'm a fiend for junk food, bro. Like, like, I mean, I can eat insane amount of junk food.
If you could spend 1 month anywhere in the world, where would it be and why?
Probably, I would have to say Paris, only
Uh-huh.
because there's magic in that city there's various cities in Europe that I feel that way about. You're sitting
Yep.
in one as
Yep.
we speak,
Yep.
but gun to my head, it's Paris, only because there's a romance in that city that I think in this world there's a serious lack of romance in this world, and a serious lack of glamour and sort of fairy tale kind of atmosphere,
Mm.
because we are all like staring at a screen that is very detached from all of that. But in that city in particular, it exists just about on every street corner. I mean, you can fall in love in Paris in 6 minutes,
It's
and
amazing.
it not only with someone but the city itself. And there's something in the ether, in the air there, that just fulfills the soul in a way that not many places do.
Incredible. I was just there 2 weeks ago for 3 or 4 days. It's remarkable. I mean, the
Yeah.
French, it's another conversation with them. I just wish they could just be a little, would it kill them to be a little fucking nicer? Just
You
a
know,
little.
it's funny. It's funny people say that. Every time I've been there,
They
I've
love
had
you.
nothing but amazing experience with the nicest people. And I remember the first
You're
time going
looking
there,
for
I was looking for it. I'm like, I'm gonna knock some French dude out, right? And
it.
and they could not have been nicer and sweeter. And what I'm like, where are all the nasty people? I'm looking to get into something and I got nothing.
They're coming.
Yeah.
Are
Yeah.
there any positions or opinions that you've substantially changed your mind about? Where I used to think this way, but as I'm getting older, I changed my mind on this. I don't feel that way anymore. I now feel this way.
No, really. I mean, I've kind of have had a core set of values and sort of opinions that I've held probably throughout my life. And even as a young person, I was always cognizant about seeing the other side.
Mm-hmm.
But now I would say, if anything, I'm even more cognizant about walking in someone else's shoes and seeing the other side. And that you don't have to particularly like someone to respect their opinion, or that, they have a good idea. There are plenty of nasty people in this world who have had a good idea. You have to sort of be open to the idea rather than making it personal about the person.
Yeah, and I think that tactical empathy is just really a skill set that a lot of us now, we're so divided with everything that we just don't want to hear
Oh,
the other person. So
I,
it's
I, I
nice.
I honestly think that's the biggest problem we have in the world, in both politics and religion, in
Yeah.
that we've now taken the stance that everybody's got the market cornered on being right. And if you're not on my team, you're wrong. So that it's not possible for someone else on the other team to have a good idea just because they're on the other team.
I tell you, I blame social media for that because the algorithm is serving up only what we're interested in. So all we get is the peanut gallery, and we get the same
100%.
You know?
100%.
Whereas, years ago we went to, Thanksgiving and we had to listen to Uncle Louie. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah. Oh, I miss Uncle Louie. But I got to tell you, I don't want to be hypocritical about it, right? Social media in terms of commerce is a boom. And I'm living proof of that, right? But what it has done to us socially, I think has been one of the most destructive things that has come along in 20 years. And it's a wrestling match I go through, balancing the commerce side with also knowing that socially it can be, but like any weapon, it can be used for good or it can be used for something not so good. And ultimately it's up to the person who's using it. And it has some great things about it too. I mean, it can expose you to, I found artists and things on social media that I never would have found, had I not been on there and searching and whatever. But as a society, what it's done to us, I fear for young people these days.
Yeah, for sure. It's gotten out of hands. Okay, last question. Let's change it up a little bit.
Sure.
What one question would you like to ask me?
Well, I got this thing in my neck, and
that is, by the way, that is the reason why I am no longer a chiropractor, because you cannot tell anybody. Not only is it I got this thing.
Yeah.
What comes with the I got this thing is the story of how they think they got the thing. I think it was 1976. It could have been 77. I was in a car accident. I think I was hit from the right, but it might have been the left. I flipped the car over. When I woke up, my third finger was numb. Maybe it was my thumb. And when I go like that, but sometimes if I do that,
right,
and you're like, dude, I'm at a fucking Christmas party.
Right, exactly. Like I just sprouted 3 more gray hairs on my head, and I was clean shaven when you started this conversation. I would ask you, I would ask you the question that I think, if you ask anyone, is the hardest one for them to answer, but yet it's the simplest one.
Yep.
What do you want?
I want freedom to do what I want with who I want, as often as I want, whenever I want. And so everything that I'm doing in my life right now is in service to being able to create the infrastructure to allow that statement.
You could not ask for a better answer.
Boom! Christopher Korey, this was so good. Thank you so much for doing this. I know my daughter, I said this in the intro, my daughter was like, Dad, you are embarrassing me in the Apple store. You're stalking this man. He thinks you're some kind. I'm like, no, he's my fashion. He's my icon. No.
Doppelganger.
Well, listen, I take a half a doppel.
A dollop.
I'll take a dollop. I don't need the whole doppel. Well, Christopher, thank you so much for taking the time.
Pleasure was mine, brother. I really do appreciate it, and I'm humbled and honored that you asked me.
Thanks, man.
All right, bro.
The next step in your next chapter, rate and review this podcast. This is one small way to cause a ripple effect and help other people just like you move into their next chapter.